Hello everybody and welcome to Sport by Numbers. Thank you for joining me again on this weekend in review. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys a chance to check out the team sheets here if you didn't do it, and I'm going to talk over it. So if you guys care, take a look over there, or just focus on my pretty face. Maestro Michael Olise powers Bayern Munich in the comeback win in a brace and a hat-trick of assists. The game got off to a worrying start for the hosts, who went down 2-0 early on to Yuto Suzuki and Johan Menzabi's goals in the 12th and 17th minutes respectively. They deserved nothing less, honestly, having earned 6 corners in the first 17 minutes, and they used the same playbook in quick back-to-back corner routines. Suzuki had a nice strike, and Menzabi raised higher than everybody else to get a sweet header that went over looping Manuel Neuer and dipped under the bar just in time to get that second one there. But Freiburg didn't kick on from there, and it ended up being one of those cases where 2-0 is a dangerous scoreline. 2-0 is definitely a dangerous scoreline. They found out in real life again, because after that it was all Bayern, and the comeback started with Olise picking up the ball, you know what I mean, on over here. He started driving down the right-hand flank in the 18th minute. He cuts through 2 defenders over here before cutting back over here into the center. When he gets into there, he's going to put a ball perfectly onto the feet of Leonard Karl, the 17-year-old, get his first goal in the Bundesliga from the center of the box. After the first 20 minutes, Freiburg went ahead 2-0. It was all Bayern. They had 71% of the possession. They had 925 total touches to Freiburg's 437. Even with that in mind, it's just important to note that Freiburg weren't going to let themselves be bullied for the rest of the match, though. Although they never got back onto the scoreline, they were definitely productive and part of the match. They had 15 tackles, 9 interceptions, but at the same time, there were a couple shortcomings here that really started to come through as the game went on. They had little possession, and in the little possession that they did have, they had a poor pass accuracy of only 74%, making only 246 passes across the whole game. And they favored the long ball, obviously having 61 passes that were over 40 yards. They were obviously trying to alleviate pressure from Bayern's relentless attack as the game wore on, and it helped to some degree, but again, it wasn't foolproof, having 6 goals scored past them after their 2 goals in 17 minutes in the beginning of the game. So besides that draw last week to Union Berlin, Bayern have been perfect in the Bundesliga. Let's see what they do next. Freiburg are definitely good value for money here, and we'll see how they do in the next fixture that they have. Next, let's take a look at Borussia Dortmund versus Stuttgart. This was an even contest at the end, but Dortmund fans will definitely feel it was another result that they should have secured, having gone 2-0 up. And if not then they definitely felt that they should have had it when Karim Adeyemi scored what he thought was most certainly the winner at the end of the game, but they had to settle for a draw when Denis Undav scored his hat-trick goal after Adeyemi and secured a draw for Stuttgart there. So the match was really interesting. It was like a back and forth for the first 30 minutes or so, and then Emre Can steps up to take a penalty, and he buries that superbly well. And afterwards, we have Bayer come in to get the second goal. After that, we didn't really see too much more coming from the match from either side. It was a little bit back and forth, and we ended up getting to halftime at the interval there, 2-0 up to Borussia Dortmund. Again, perpetuating that idea that they should close out games where they're leading, especially going into the second half. Then we came back in the second half at the interval, and Stuttgart really took the initiative. We saw Udenov get his first goal just 2 minutes on the other side of halftime. After that, Stuttgart had the edge in possession, but it was really marginal, see, because it was only 55%. So it wasn't much better than half the time, but they were still pressing, right? And that also speaks to why the scoreline was even 3-3 at the end. The middle of the park was a fiercely contested area, and both teams ended up having their troubles in this part. Poor passing accuracy was the name of the day for both of them, with Dortmund having only 77% accuracy, while Stuttgart was slightly better at 81%. Dortmund had 350 passes, and this can be explained by their preference to bypass the midfield. Nearly 17% of their total passes I just mentioned there were long passes. For some reason, they couldn't play through Stuttgart in the midfield, and they opted to go for the long ball over the top using their wingers on the flanks. Stuttgart felt this strain, and they also decided to start pursuing long passes as well as the game went on, and they ended up accumulating 57 long passes themselves. But they also had another 100 passes in general on top of those long passes. So for them, it was a much smaller sample size overall compared to Dortmund. Both teams ended up working their respective goalkeepers, obviously 3-3 scoreline here, and Dortmund had 13 total attempts with less than half of them on target at 5. But Stuttgart had 16 attempts, and 6 were on target too, so they definitely made sure to give them something to think about as well. The result keeps both teams locked on 22 points. Battle for 4th, that's really important. with Dortmund ahead only by goal difference, so they'll want to keep that in mind as they go forward here, especially into the festive period. And lastly, let's take a look at RB Leipzig's game versus Werder Bremen. This is another really important game here in the context of the top of the Bundesliga. Bayern are kind of running away with it, right? But RB Leipzig are in second place, and they're just hanging out right there, just in case Bayern slip up. However unlikely that might be, and Vincent Kompany knows it as well, you know, it's just not going to happen. But they're still keeping pace with the champions, which is very, very important if you want to be involved in that conversation. And they are most certainly involved in that conversation. So with the lineup here on the left-hand side, let's get into it a little bit. The scoreline really suggested it was a routine win for the host, and in some respects it certainly was. However, Bremen were an attacking force as well. While Leipzig started off well, Bremen were able to limit them to shots from the outside or from really difficult angles. It was a tightly contested encounter that looked like it was going to require something really spectacular to break the deadlock, and it really, really was going to take that. Because a rocket from outside the box from Hassan Ouedraogo. Oh man, sorry Hassan. Anyway, Hassan, he takes a strike on, right? When Cameron Puertas just stands off of him in the center of the park. He's coming around to the top of the box there, and Puertas just stands back, so he has all the time in the world to look up and take his shot, and he does. From there, he hits the top left-hand corner. Riedel Baku was credited with an assist, supposedly. I saw it on the stat sheet, but he had no idea because this was all down to individual brilliance from Hassan, and Leipzig would owe their lead to that brilliance. Afterwards, he was involved again, where he pinged in a close-range cross to Christoph Baumgartner in the 62nd minute. It was a delicious backheel that was goal-bound from Baumgartner, but for a save from Marco Gruhl, who came all the way back from the left flank up an attack to stop that from going in when nobody else was there. He earned his pay. The second goal came from the chaos of Leipzig's corners, and it wasn't dealt with again. Baumgartner was in there involved, and he jumped higher than the defender there to head the ball back down to the feet of Xavier Schlager, and he had his back to goal like this, and he was able to take a minute, push off the defender, and spin and turn, able to pick out the corner there and get the second goal for the hosts. It wasn't all their way again, but it was a wonderful goal and an example again of how they were allowing Leipzig too much time in the penalty area, and Leipzig were making them pay for that each time. If we take a look at this, the ball was pretty evenly contested across the game, with Leipzig sort of edging Bremen after possession at 52%. It's very marginal, right? Leipzig did have 720 touches, but Bremen also had 688, so they were definitely getting on the ball as well. And the ball was lost equally 24 times apiece for both sides of the team, with the majority of the battles taking place down Bremen's left-hand flank there, suggesting that was the focus of the action. And it really was. Down the left-hand flank over here, with Marco Gruhl, the guy that saved it off the side there, off the line, and Marco Friedel, the left back. They had a lot of success here against Diomande, Hassan, and Baku. In the end, too, both sides ended up working the goalkeepers here, Gulashi and Backhaus. Leipzig attempted 22 shots, and they ended up having 60% on target accuracy, while Bremen attempted 15 and had a little bit less than half on target against Gulashi over here. But he was perfect and earned the clean sheet at the end of the game. Overall, Leipzig were really effective in creating a high number of chances relative to the possession that they had, but they had really poor finishing, and they really did have a number of chances to increase their lead from 2-0 to more. Alright, moving on. Let's go down south to warmer pastures in Spain. I love España. But that's not for right now. Let's begin with Barcelona and Athletic Club. Benvenido al nuevo Nou Camp, man, right? That's what they say, something like that? Oh wait, no. That's not Catalan, but they christened the new stadium with a dominant 4-0 performance to Athletic Club here at the new Nou Camp. They'll be very happy with this performance, and especially some of the goals that they scored were really nice. But it wasn't necessarily vintage Barca in the way that they won the game. But let's get into it, right? Robert Lewandowski starts the scoring here early on after he pounces on a loose ball right here at the top of the box after they've dispossessed Athletic right here. And he takes it a little bit wide to this area of the pitch, but he ends up sneaking it past Unai Simon right here on his near post. Now Simon, he gets a hand to it, and he will almost certainly wishes he has done more there, because as the day goes on, that's going to be foreshadowing for the next goal that comes through. When Ferran Torres come take it from bad to worse for Simon, because Torres is going to be right here about on the halfway line. Down here, Lamine Yamal is going to pick up the ball, and this is an unbelievable amount of stuff to unpack in one little section of play right here. So right here, Lamine Yamal is going to get the ball. He's going to start coming this way just a little bit. And like I said, Torres is up here. Yamal is going to see him make a run straight through. Now the two defenders here are right here. Torres is right here, so Lamine is going to take off a little bit, and right before he crosses over into the offensive half, he's going to hit a cross right into here, into Ferran's right. Ferran still has a bunch of work to do. He's going to run through from here straight down. And when he gets to here, he's going to go a little bit wide, unfortunately. But that doesn't matter because he looks at the angle and he's like, I can do this. I can do this. But he can do this. Si puede, si puede. And he goes over here, right? And he hits the ball straight at Simon. And Simon, to be fair, is in good position. However, there's foul play that comes into effect here, right? Where's that foul play coming from, though? It's coming from his own foot. Unai Simon's foot ends up getting in the way. It knocks the ball up onto his hand. The ball bobbles between his hand and his body, and it ends up sneaking right by him. If you go and you look at this, it's really unfortunate, and you could see he looks every bit as helpless as he did in that video clip when he's crawling back on his hands and knees trying to get this ball that has just slid through him. And it's going so slowly. In real time, I can only imagine what it felt like for him, because it must have been like an eternity watching the ball just roll so slowly for 2-0. Now again, like I said, this was another instance where he got a hand to the ball, but it wasn't enough. In this instance, it's a little bit different compared to the first one, which he definitely should have saved. This one's more of an accident, but still 2-0, and it didn't help the visitors here. Afterwards, Fermin Lopez was able to win the ball back just outside Athletics box again, right here. And this is a mistake from one of the defenders, the central defenders right over here, who tries to clear the ball, but he doesn't. So he picks it up right here on the edge of the box. Right here on the other side of the box is Eric Garcia, who's come all the way up from his deep position down here. And he plays a 1-2 with Fermin Lopez. And Lopez goes through while Garcia squeezes the ball through two defenders right here to get the ball to Lopez, who's unmarked now, one-on-one with Simon. And Simon, to be fair, does rush him quickly and closes down the angle, but there's nothing he could do as he goes around Simon's left into the bottom of the corner. He was left alone, and he did his best he could with the angle, but again, the real damage from Simon was earlier on in the game at this point where he had already given up those 2 goals. Afterwards, biggest piece of action that we had to see was that Oyhan Sanset, sorry about that, was originally shown a yellow card, but the yellow card ends up getting upgraded by VAR after they look at the challenge that he has also on Fermin. But at that point, it didn't really matter because the match was already over as a contest at that point. We take a look specifically at the stats just before the red card, right? They had 8 shot attempts with 1 on target only, and they were losing possession frequently at 17 times on the clip there. They had made 3 errors already this far into the game, and those led to 3 direct goals from Barcelona, who were clinical. After the red card, they just completely fell off. They had 5 shot attempts, 1 on target again, so they doubled technically, but for what? They had just 85 passes in the last 40 minutes with 154 touches altogether, almost exclusively in their half of the pitch. Barcelona were superb, making the most of their advantage with 67% of the ball. It wasn't really vintage Barcelona as I highlighted, but they were able to close the gap to league leaders Real Madrid just to 1 point, which is all that's going to matter today. And it's going to be all the more important when Real Madrid end up drawing the next day against Elche, which we'll be talking about later on. Let's take a look here at Villarreal versus Mallorca. Now, Villarreal are in a really awesome position. They're in 3rd place. They're right there with the rest of the pack, Barcelona and Real. A few more points off of Real's top position, though. So today, the name of the game for them was also keeping the pressure up. But for them, it's on Barcelona. And also making sure that they keep their gap between themselves as well as Atletico. Today, they did their job, and that's really all that matters. Nothing more, nothing less. It was wonderful. Like I said, I had a kickoff. They were in 3rd place, 2 points back from Barcelona, and they took care of business to finish the day. 3rd place, 2 points behind Barcelona. Again, let's take a look at this because it seems like a pretty straightforward game, right? Right. But you can only beat what's right in front of you, and that's what they did. The beginning of the game got off to a bang with Villarreal responsible for both goals scored in the first 8 minutes, with each team getting a goal apiece. The first goal came from Moreno over here, number 7. He was in the box, and a cross is going to come in here for number 24, Alfonso Pedraza. He's going to be over here. He's going to hit this cross in. Ayoze Perez is going to be right here on this part of the box. Ayoze, and he goes up there, right? There's 2 defenders right on the other side of him right here in this space. They end up actually getting their head to the ball first, but the ball bobbles between their head and Perez's, who's right next to him. So Perez ends up blocking their clearance, where the ball drops to this area right here, where Moreno is, who's there at the right place in the right time, slot through the first goal in the 6th minute for Villarreal. Just moments later, a frenetic start continued when Jan Regili took the ball down here on the left. He ends up cutting in to the middle, right around here, but he leaves the ball off for Pablo Torre, who's coming in as well, streaking behind him. As he's coming in, Pablo Torre sees a Samu Costa coming down here, filling in the space that's left behind by Jan over here, who's now in the middle. Pablo Torre ends up checking the ball, passing it out wide left to Samu over here, who ends up putting the ball past the goalkeeper, Junior here. On replay, it looks like he should have had the save based on the positioning of the goalkeeper. Definitely looks like he could have saved. Anyway, 1-1 at that point. And let's take a look at Mallorca specifically now before we go on. As an attacking force, they were pretty goal shy when we take a look. In the beginning, they had some chances, they had shots, but after the 50th minute or so, there were no more shots for the next 40 minutes or so. They didn't get a whiff of the ball in front of the goal. They had chances, they were working the ball here in the midfield and in the attacking half as well, but they just never got to the goal. And whenever they did try to take a shot on, it was blocked the few times that they did. It was really a graveyard shift for the forwards. This period of the match also ends up coinciding with a period of dominance for Villarreal, which makes sense. So during this time period, in the 40 minutes from the 50th to roughly full time, Mallorca don't really do much in the attacking third. We see Villarreal have 209 passes to just their 92. They have 7 shots, they're 1. Mallorca lost possession 11 times during this period, mostly down the flanks where the defenders were pressing high up to win the ball back. In the waning minutes, we really saw them give it a go, especially over the last 11 minutes. And 8 minutes of stoppage time. They had 2 shots, which was, again, more than they had in the last 40 minutes or so, but they were both off target. And Vedette Moriki ends up missing a sitter right in front of the goal, right here. Should have been a goal for them. And in this time period too, they also had 60 passes to Villarreal's 32 passes. But at this point, the game was already out of reach for them, and they didn't really do anything. Overall, Mallorca favored long balls with 90 such passes, often to alleviate pressure during the press from Villarreal. They did create chances early on. When the second half started, they looked like they still were drinking their tea back in the locker room, because you spent nearly a third of the game just not troubling the opposition goal at all. You know, you can't expect to win like that. If you only have 1 shot in the entirety of the second half before the extra time, it's just not going to be a recipe for winning. Now, if we take a look at the hosts, just real quick, in addition to winning 2-0, right, there's really some nice work going on here and some interchange of play. The hosts had the most success for themselves down this right-hand flank here, going even as far as Moreno up top in attack, especially here with Pau Navarro and Nicolas Pepe, which drove most of the attacks with 44% of attacks for the team down this flank. Moreno was really key, dropping back from his position up high down to midfield here and here in the right flank to also work with those 2 players to create opportunities for the team. And lastly, let's move on to our final match that we're going to focus on here in La Liga. Elche versus Real Madrid. It was a really well-contested match where possession was nearly even, where only Real Madrid had a marginal advantage at 51.5% to Elche's 48.5%. And both teams really looked after the ball well. Madrid slightly edging out Elche in pass accuracy, but both were very high at 90 and 86% respectively. If we look at only the first 45 minutes, they were pretty close, honestly. Real had 8 shots, they had 2 on target, 2 shots blocked. They took 6 of those shot attempts from inside the box area right here. This is in really good positions and really good options for them to take the lead, but they couldn't do so at this point. Elche, on the other hand, had 7 shots, 3 on target as opposed to Real's 2, and they also had 2 block shots. And they enjoyed 221 passes across the entire half, which puts them in similar territory as Real, who ended up having 259 passes. However, the key differentiator between the 2 sets, right, is that most of Real's passes at 165 were forward-based passes compared to 113 backwards for them. Both sides ended up enjoying the flanks often. We saw Elche get 7 crosses, and then Real Madrid ended up having 10. There was not necessarily a side of favoritism. They were working it pretty evenly, both teams, which is impressive again, just showing you that really wasn't a lot of parity in this match. Alright, let's take a look at the second half now. Focusing again on Real first, they had more shots at 12, and they were also on target more with 5 shots altogether. They would end up splitting 2 goals for themselves and then 2 goals for the visitor, or for the hosts in Elche. But up until they got their goal, it certainly seemed like they were going to lose the game because they ended up going behind in the 84th minute to the Febas goal. They were a little bit more reckless in this half with the ball, which resulted in them losing possession 13 times. But they continued to leverage the flanks often. They especially started to leverage the left-hand side more as the game went on, with Vinicius being subbed on later on in the game. Now, if we take a look at Elche, they broke the deadlock first, actually, on the other side of halftime, which was really awesome to see, through Alex Febas in the 53rd minute. And this ended up prompting a slew of changes from Real and Xabi Alonso's side, with Valverde, Vinicius, and Eduardo Camavinga coming on to replace Dani Ceballos, Rodrigo, and Fran Garcia, who weren't really helping make an effort at that point according to the manager. But they went hit back for another 20 minutes. It took them a while to kind of get percolating. And they had the edge, though, in passing in the second half. Elche did, that is, at 253 completed passes. And they were also moving the ball forward more often than not at 69% of the time in the second half. They were definitely poking and prodding Real's goal in their half, trying to look for a winner. They did secure what they thought was a winner, like I said, in the 84th minute. They weren't able to hold on for the result in the end. The mad dash finish that included the 2 goals, one for each side in the 84th minute and then in the 87th minute with the equalizer from Jude Bellingham, was only part of it because 6 minutes into stoppage time, Victor Chus is going to get a yellow card in the 6th minute of second half stoppage time, which is unfortunate for him because he had already earned a yellow card earlier in the game. So this would result in a red card for him. Real will be sitting uncomfortably right now at the summit of La Liga with their league cut now down to 1 point, which if you looked at just a couple weeks ago was much, much wider to Barcelona. I expect them to bounce back in midweek against Olympiacos in the Champions League. Wait a second. If I think about that again, I also thought that they would bounce back against, who was it? Against Rayo Vallecano a couple weeks ago, but they drew there. I also thought that they would bounce back here against Elche, but they didn't get the win again. There's more draws, and it's not good. It's a similar situation of what we saw with Napoli, who were also league leaders over in Serie A, who really faltered through October and into the beginning of November before they got their win today. First time in November, which we'll talk about later on. So we'll have to just wait and see what version of Xabi Alonso's Real Madrid side we get against Olympiacos in the middle of the week. Alright, let's go north up to France here now. Let's start with the boys, Marseille. They took on Nice on Friday ahead of everybody in the weekend. The Mediterranean derby got off to a really quick start for the visitors, Marseille, when Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang was able to open the scoring in the 11th minute, really before the hosts were able to settle into the derby. Now, if we focus in statistically just on those first 11 minutes, we could see that Marseille were really driving the possession and the play. They had 3 shots on target in that time, all dead center, and they would end up getting the reward that they deserved at that point through Aubameyang's goal there in the 11th minute. However, after that really rude awakening for the hosts, from the 12th minute on, we saw Nice really grow into the game. They ended up having more shots than Marseille's at 7-5, and almost all of them were also down from the middle. They outpassed the visitors 229 to 141 during this time period, which is just a little over a half hour from when they scored that first goal to halftime. They actually end up having more forward passes alone, compared to Marseille's total passes, which were only good for 150 or 141. So you really start to see how the game changed from all Marseille in the beginning to just all Nice in the other part of that first half. For all the positive play that they were having as they were growing into the game, Mason Greenwood was going to prevent any kind of forward momentum growing that much more when he got his first goal for the visitors in the 33rd minute. When the game restarted, Marseille really made the most of their chances because before Greenwood got his second goal in the 53rd minute and the team's third goal on the night in the 53rd minute, they were really a non-entity in the first 13 minutes of the second half, which is kind of funny when you think about it because the first half, they were all gassed in the first 11 minutes. And then in the second half, the first 13 minutes, they were just on E. It looked like they were done for. And then they go outside, they have themselves a little smoke break, they come back on the pitch, and they kick it into high gear. In those first 13 minutes, though, they only had 29 passes, which is less than half the total of the other teams. They had no shots on target during that time, and no shot attempts whatsoever to speak of. And they also ended up having an error that would lead to an attempt by Arthur Vermeeren early on in the 48th minute. So it really wasn't looking good. But from the 53rd minute on, when we see Greenwood get the second goal, just for 5 minutes from the 53rd minute on to the 58th minute, we just see Marseille break the backs of the hosts in the derby. They're going to have 2 shots on target, both of which are going to be goals. Surprise, surprise. But they're still going to be playing with a lot less of the ball somehow, and only be making 25 passes to the hosts' 40 passes, right? And they're only going to end up having 38 touches to the 55 touches that the hosts have as well. So you can really see that they're playing on the counterattack and just making the most of open play opportunities when they get a chance to break on. Mohamed Ali Cho, he ends up getting a consolation goal in the 63rd minute, and that'll look good on the club's social media accounts. There ain't no bragging rights for Sir Jim's other club down here in the south of France in this derby, where the spoils are all going towards Marseille. Igor Paixão added one last goal in the 74th minute for his scrapbook in a match that was long over at this point. and Mason Greenwood's goals were his 7th and 8th goals in the last 5 matches, just as a point of note for you guys. Alright, the other match we want to take a look at here in France is PSG versus Le Havre. With Marseille taking care of business the day before in an emphatic 5-1 win, PSG knew before a ball was kicked that they had to win to retain first in the league, no matter what, at the end of the weekend. So when they went out to the pitch and they looked across at the minnows that are Le Havre, they said, bend over. And they did. They put them to the sword. It was classic, big club versus minnow. Because the scoreline would end up being 3-0. But it took some doing to get there to that position at full time. In the first half, for all their dominance in the first 45 minutes, they would only end up 1 goal to show for it going in to the locker rooms. They had 12 shots to Le Havre's 8, and 5 of those were on target. They were actually able to also draw 4 saves from Le Havre's goalkeeper here, Diao. But they also had 323 passes to their 162 passes, which, in case you couldn't count, is a lot of freaking passes. They had nearly double the forward passes alone of those passes, 209, and 81 of their passes were targeting the final third. That is from PSG. So PSG were spending a lot of their time in this attacking zone. And the other time that they weren't in the attacking zone was for the most part spent right here in the middle of the park. They spent the least amount of time over here, obviously, in their end, and the scoreline shows that as well. During this time as well, in the first half, we also saw them just being on the ball all the time, way more than Le Havre. They had 418 touches to their 248. But with all this dominance, they did have moments where they looked a little shaky as well. And the visitors were able to capitalize actually on an error that led to a shot attempt at the goal there for Lucas to have to deal with. And he did well, as he did with a number of other attempts throughout the game when he was called into action. PSG only ended up raising the temperature in the second half. They had 19 shots, almost 5 times Le Havre's 4, and they drew 4 more saves from the goalkeeper in this half too. The majority of the shots too were in the center of the penalty area right here, as well as in the 6-yard box. They had almost double the passes again at 289 passes, and they had 17 key passes, also showcasing just how many chances they were creating for their goal scorers and how many more chances they could have put past the goalkeeper to increase the scoreline for themselves. Ending up with only 3 kind of seems pretty conservative when you look at that with that focus, right? You keep going on and on and on about how PSG were really just excellent, but there's no need to hammer the point home for Le Havre. PSG maintained their 2-point lead at the top over Marseille until next week at the very least, and they're back in action in the Champions League midweek against Tottenham, who need to really make a statement after getting slept on in the North London derby. Moving along, let's set our sights on the Premier League. Over the weekend we had some really fascinating matches, including some surprise results. I'm going to start with Nottingham Forest versus Liverpool. Obviously, this is the game that has the most storylines coming out of it post-game now. Obviously, there's a particular focus on Liverpool, but we'll get there. Because it was just such a breathtaking display from Forest, who were on their knees only weeks ago under Ange Postecoglou and destined for relegation, it seemed like. But today, they were able to beat the champions convincingly. And like I said, the story should be about Forest and their game today, but it's almost certainly going to be all about Arne Slot and his position as manager, which we'll touch on a little bit more later. Today, Forest didn't really dominate. In fact, at times, it felt as though Liverpool were playing a training match where they was all of them, and whenever they felt like giving the ball away, they gave the ball away, or they gave it away because, the gaffer blew the whistle in training. They're just happy to get the ball. And to be honest, they could care less because, why would it matter? The statistics are just the statistics. But to hell with the statistics, right? Because who the hell cares when the only thing that matters is you go out there on the pitch and show what you can do with the little possession you have. And that's what they did. They went out there, they took the little possession that they have, and they buried 3 goals past Alisson, who was back in goal after returning from his injury woes. Let's look at from Liverpool's side of things, right? They had 74% possession. They had 834 touches to 418 for Forest. They attempted nearly 3 times as many passes as Forest and were 20% more successful in terms of pass accuracy. 81% of their shots were coming from the middle, right in here. Boom. And over 76% of their shots were right in here inside the penalty area. Forest, like I said, the little that they had, they created a significant number of chances, and they favored attacking through the middle themselves, mostly through Morgan Gibbs-White and Elliot Anderson. Liverpool packed the middle of the park right here, so it ended up forcing a lot of turnovers for them high up, and they were able to maintain the ball in this zone as well as in the attacking half for them, where it was often in the box here where they were getting off shots, if you recall. Now, with it was all said and done, Forest were really limited to just shots outside the box, with almost half of their shots coming or originating from outside the box. But it didn't matter because, again, 3-0 is 3-0, no matter how you get there in the end. If you're Liverpool, where do you go? I don't think personally the discussion should be about sack the manager or not, but that's where they find themselves with some fans. Besides beating Real Madrid and Eintracht Frankfurt in the Champions League, as well as Villa in the league, it's really been rough seas for them. They've lost 3-0 to Man City last week. Obviously, that was a big loss for them. They also lost 3-0 to Crystal Palace. They lost 3-2 to Brentford. They lost 2-1 to Man United. They lost 2-1 to Chelsea as well. They lost 1-0 to Galatasaray. They lost 2-1 to Crystal Palace again way back when. There's a lot of losses and not a lot of wins in that span of time. So it's really starting to stack up in terms of the pressure. But it's not like you're walking down to Wallen in freaking Amsterdam, right? Where you have umpteen choices that you can just pick. Right now, I don't think it's a good idea, and they should wait because the manager market is poor at the moment. Plus, when you also look at their summer signings, none of them have really bedded in well besides Ekitike. And Wirtz and Isaac are drawing the ire of the supporters most. And you could see it every single time. Isaac set a new record now for most game involvements, I believe it was, outscoring 4. You know, he said he wanted to make history. He's making history, right? Yeah. Not the history you want to be making. Plus, we also see a number of Liverpool's key title team not performing well this season. Virgil van Dijk is not doing well. Konate is having a nightmare of a beginning of the season. We also see that Mohamed Salah is not up to par this year at the same level that he was. Of course, another year older, and we may be not thinking about the wear and tear that we've seen on Salah after so many years now in the Premier League. And we also saw Callister really underwhelm us today, and he was a really integral part of the team as well. Bottom line, though, I think you have to start winning no matter what, because otherwise, if you don't start winning, then it doesn't matter whether there's no good managers out there or not. They're just going to have to pull the trigger, because the festive fixture period is coming up, and there's just too many games and too many points on the line for them to completely throw away the entire season. We'll see. Okay, let's keep it moving and grooving in the Premier League. Another match day, another loss for Wolves. On Rob Thomas's debut at Molineux as new Wolves manager, he could not get the benefit of the new manager bounce that so many managers before him have received. And unfortunately for him, they continue to be rock bottom of the Premier League. Today, most of the attack was focused down this left-hand flank. Tyreek Mitchell and Yeremy Pino were responsible for 43% of Crystal Palace's attacks on the day, and they were superb going forward, as well as turning in all-around performances throughout the pitch. We also saw Wolves being really aggressive trying to win the ball back often, and they attempted 30-something tackles throughout the entirety of the match, especially in this area and down this flank as well, where Pino and Mitchell were having their successes. As far as an attacking force goes, Wolves were never really able to turn those turnovers they were able to create through those tackles into attacking opportunities, phases of play. They often broke down or were never able to connect with somebody here in the penalty area, which is a shame. But that's for Rob Thomas to figure out over the coming weeks, especially before the Christmas period happens. And then as far as the rest of the match is concerned, the majority of the time it was spent right here in the middle of the park, with the ball spending 46% of the time. I also just wanted to take a second here to highlight somebody. This man, Adam Wharton. What a superb display from him yet again. He's just been on the uppity up. On the day today alone, he had 1 assist, 2 key passes, 2 tackles, 2 interceptions, and he had 55 passes, an accuracy of 85.5%, which was the second most passes on the team. He is pulling the strings in the middle of the park. He is a little bit all over the place in the best way possible. He's covering the bag, he's providing creativity going forward, and he's taking care of everything else in the middle of the park. All around midfielder. You can't say enough good things about him. And Palace in general, though, they're flying pretty high with Oliver Glasner working miracles. His side are already in 5th place, as I said. 1 point back from Villa, actually, for 4th place. It's still pretty early on in the season. And the most important thing, honestly, now, is how the squad is going to cope with the fixture load going into the winter period, like any other team. But especially for Palace, they're back at it in midweek at Strasbourg in the Conference League. So that's just another example of where they're going to have to deal with that Thursday-Sunday fixture load, which is really difficult, especially if you talk to Man United fans like me who know it all too well. So we'll see how they do, especially through January when the match days end for the group phase. Wolves, on the other hand, are still at rock bottom of the table with just 2 points, and there are a lot of rumblings coming out of Molineux about a number of things. One of them including potentially selling assets in January because they view relegation as inevitable. But they need to start getting more shots off in general, and hopefully the law of large numbers will hold true for them. Alright, and the last game we want to look at here on Saturday was a very exciting match between 2 teams in just completely different places in the league. You have City on the one hand, who are a few points off the top, while Newcastle are just a few points off the bottom, off the relegation places. And yet, when it came time to throw down, it was Newcastle that triumphed over the favorites in Man City. Harvey Barnes would fire the Magpies to the wind with his 7-minute brace. He will rue his missed chances, especially because they were easier than the chances he ended up taking. But that's football, as he alluded to in his post-match interview. The statistics suggest that this match should have been City's game, and it would have been an opportunity for Pep's side to snowball the win that they had at Liverpool just last week into some further momentum in the league. When you look at the numbers specifically, there are a lot of things that would suggest that they should have won this match. They had 67% of the ball, with 36% alone right here, and the defensive third for Newcastle. They also had double the shots of Newcastle, 17-9, with Haaland having 5 alone. They had double the corners, they had 584 passes to Newcastle's 285, and they were dispossessing Newcastle twice as much sometimes, 8-5. Alas, they missed their opportunities, and they have no one to blame but themselves. Now, if we look at just Newcastle for a second, they played like prime-time Stoke under Tony Pulis, if you're old enough for that. The only thing missing was the rain, to be honest. They had 36 clearances, 26 tackles attempted. They had a 71% success rate, definitely Pulis side. Committed 13 fouls. They won the aerial duel. How could you not? I mean, Volta-Maida is like 6'7", isn't he? 6'8"? Dude should have been in the NBA. They only had 9 shot attempts. Who the hell cares, though, when you're making lemonade? Because Eddie Howe's side cooked for sure, and they definitely needed the win in the league given their position, as we alluded to earlier on. They found a lot of success down the flanks, putting in 14 crosses, and they had the most success down the left-hand flank over here, with Harvey Barnes, of course, and also the returning Lewis Hall. This was a great win for Newcastle. Unfortunate for City, but that's what happens. This is football. It's very unpredictable, and we'll see how the two sides kick on next, both in the Champions League in the midweek. Alright, let's take a look at the final match for the Premier League weekend that we're going to focus on. It was Arsenal taking on Tottenham in the North London derby, and it was Arsenal that ran 4-1 winners out on the day. The possession was pretty even when it was all said and done, with Arsenal having a slight edge at 57%. But they used that possession to create a number of chances, as you see with the scoreline, and they also had chances to have more goals as well. Let's start with the shots, though, for Arsenal, who weren't afraid to take strikes on from distance. But they also had the majority of their shots from inside the 18-yard box, with over half at 59%. And 76% of their strikes, including the ones from outside the box, were from the middle right here. Arsenal, on the other hand, were able to limit Tottenham to 3 shots, 1 from right here, and then 2 from over here, which is not exactly conducive to winning, as Tottenham know all too well. The majority of the action was reserved for the right-hand flank down here, with Jurrien Timber and Bukayo Saka driving forward. Saka had 3 crosses from this space alone, and Jurrien Timber, Declan Rice, and Mikel Merino all added in another one apiece. The Gunners were able to keep in Tottenham's defensive third for 39% of the match, and they contained the ball to the center of the park for the rest of the time, for the most part. The man of the match was indisputably Eberechi Eze, who had the hat-trick, which was some statement from the new signing, who rejected the opportunity to join Spurs himself in favor of the Gunners. Talk about a big Trossard was a close shout himself for man of the match when he got off the mark in the 36th minute, and he would also assist on the final goal. He was also good for 2 key passes and 4 dribbles, but then it was all Eze in the goals, and he honestly deserved man of the match, no doubt. Richarlison, he was able to catch David Raya out with a wild effort from right here, almost at the halfway line. This was over as a contest, though, long before that, and the away end was already fairly empty at this point, so nobody was there to celebrate with him. In the end, Tottenham only had 3 shots, not a single one inside the box, as we said. They lost possession fairly often, especially in their own end and in the middle of the park, where Arsenal were pressing high and winning the ball there often. And what else is there to really say other than to have a moan about being toothless again on a big occasion? Of course, unless you're playing Man United. And finally, let's finish our weekend here in Italy. Who wouldn't want to finish the weekend in Italy? Let's take our sights down to Naples, where we could look at Napoli versus Atalanta. Napoli came into the game knowing that if they won, they would go back top of the league, at least for Saturday, until the rest of the title challengers played the following day. And they were able to take care of business in convincing fashion, with David Nerish's brace was able to drive points home for Conte's side, where Noah Lang was also able to get a goal to add security for the hosts in the 45th minute. As those scorelines suggest that Napoli were always in control, it certainly wasn't the case. Management for Atalanta said that they expected regression from the group because Gasperini overachieved. And to be fair, Atalanta had fallen off a bit, but they still had 55% of the possession across the game. Karnasecki, keeper, made 3 saves for them, but they were all in the second half, and not one of those 3 shots that were on target in the first half, which were one of the 3 goals, were one of the saves that he was able to make. After the interval, Napoli pretty much let the visitors take the initiative with their cushion in place, and Conte, known for his defensive principles, was able to make Atlanta work for it, but they were not successful. They had 11 shots to their 6, with only 3 getting on target. They were able to drive the possession and use it well, making 250 passes to their 192, but they also lost possession 15 times, which was showcasing their desire and impetus trying to attack but lacking the ability to convert those. The importance of this win cannot be overstated. Napoli were without a win in either the League or the Champions League, and also lost before the last international break to lose their grip on first place here in Italy. Gianluca Scamacca got a consolation goal for himself in the second, but they never looked like they were going to kick on. And that was that. And finally, our last match of the day is another huge derby this weekend in Milan at the San Siro. So sad we won't be getting to say that soon, but that's how it goes. There wasn't much between the two sides who were both involved in the highly congested chase for the top spot here in Italy for the Scudetto. Ahead of the game, Milan were top of the league just due to goal difference, and Inter were back just 1 point. This was a really good performance where Inter will rue Hakan Çalhanoğlu's penalty being safe, but they definitely had opportunities to get a different goal, and they just never took their chances. But let's take a look at the first 50 minutes because it was all Inter. They had 6 shot attempts, including one from a returning Marcus Thuram, who had a shot right here in front of goal, but he was not able to work the keeper. On top of that, they also had 111 passes compared to Milan's 36, and they were able to pile the pressure on through the flanks, getting 6 crosses in, especially through Di Marco over here on the left-hand flank, which earned them 3 corners. But there was nothing to show for it, and in the next 30 minutes after that took us to halftime, they were carved out each 4 shots. They had 6 crosses each. There was 184 passes for Inter versus 195 passes for Milan, and both sides were being careless with the ball, losing it 7 and 9 times for Inter and Milan respectively. In the second half, Inter returned to the front foot with 10 shots to Milan's 3. They had nearly 3 times as many passes at 306, and they had 400 to their 223 touches in the ball. And they also got saves from Yann Sommer, who prevented 2 of 3, but couldn't stop Pulisic in the 54th minute, which proved to be the difference late on and at the end. Çalhanoğlu had his penalty attempt saved by Mignon in the 74th minute as well. Very good stop and preserved the points for Milan. And then if we focused in on just the last 15 minutes, Inter had 5 shots. They drew 2 saves from Mignon. They had 156 passes to Milan's 41s. They had 200 touches to Milan's 87, put in 11 crosses, and then had 3 more corners. Obviously, they were just peppering his goal, but they could not get past him and that defense. The game as a whole was all about Inter, from their total statistical dominance to their impotence in front of goal against their rivals. They had the edge in every category and absolutely peppered Milan's goal, especially in the first and last 15 minutes, but couldn't get the breakthrough. This is an all too familiar story for Inter, who also had a chance to go top in October against Napoli, then the league leaders, but couldn't get the win, instead settling for a draw. That was something at least. Now they need to get ready for Atletico Madrid in Champions League. Alright everybody, thank you so much for joining me on this weekend in review. Again, we had loads of derbies, lots of fun. The North London derby, Milan derby, the Mediterranean derby, and not to even mention the derby between Sheffield Wednesday and Sheffield United. We saw a ton of title contenders take care of business like they're supposed to, and we saw others like Real Madrid not necessarily do what they need to do to take care of business at the top. We'll see how it continues in the midweek with Champions League continuing on Tuesday and Wednesday, as well as the Conference League and Europa League on Thursday. We're excited to see you guys next weekend. Let me know what you're thinking. Any surprises you had, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Hit the subscribe button and the like button. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.